And now I'm going to mute everyone and let our people in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual interactive panel discussion brought to you by the Oregon chapter of ACHE. My name is Tia, and I will be serving as your ACHE technical host for today. We are so glad you are here with us. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items to help you navigate the program in our virtual environment. For the purposes of noise control, your lines will be muted for the duration of the session. The chat function will be available to you throughout the entire event. This event is being recorded and will be available for viewing in ACHE's Learning Management System in approximately 2 business days. Today's session is worth 1.5 hours of ACHE Virtual Interactive Education credit. To earn this credit, you must be logged in for the entire 90 minutes of this event. All attendees who meet this requirement will have their 1.5 Virtual Interactive Education credit applied within 2 weeks from today's event. We do encourage you to complete the evaluation for this event. I'm going to be sharing that link in the chat box before we close out today's session. Now, to begin, let me turn it over to Jennifer.
Good morning, everyone. I am Jennifer Will, and I am the chair for the Education and Planning Committee for the Oregon ACHE. And so I just wanted to give a couple recap of our current meeting today, and then also we have a few scheduled for the rest of the year. So we do have on September 27th, we have another virtual event, which will be early career development. So those that are coming up, students, those kind of things is what we're looking for. And then also we have our fall conference on November 1st, which will be in Newport, Oregon. And then we have one more virtual event for the year, which is December 6th. And that will be around palliative care, which all of us should know about palliative care. Anyway, we have a really great session today, and I'm really excited for all of you. And I wanted to introduce somebody I know very well and is amazing, and her name is Kirsten Farron. She is the VP of Patient Care Services here at Samaritan. So I'm going to hand it over to her, and I hope you all enjoy. And please, if you have any comments or questions as noted about this session or things you want to see more of, please don't hesitate to put that in the chat. Enjoy.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer. I am Kirsten Farron. I am your moderator today. So, bear with me, work in progress on learning that skill. But I am, as Jennifer mentioned, the Vice President of Patient Care Services at Samaritan Health. I thought I would tell you a little bit about myself and kick us off here. I've been a nurse for about 24 years in a variety of settings. I started out and spent about 17 years of my career in a level 1 trauma center, and then proceeded to work in a variety of hospitals of various sizes after that. For the past 5 years, I've served as a chief nursing officer and very similar role as vice president of patient care services in a couple different hospitals. So I've had a chance to kind of see the differences and the similarities between a level 1 trauma center, critical access hospital, and everything in between, right? So, but one thing that I know is that no matter where I go and no matter what size hospital I'm working in, I really am faced with many of the same challenges when it comes to retaining talent, attracting talent, managing for morale. How do we all work on those things together? And that has become such a pivotal conversation in the healthcare environment as a whole. I feel like it's almost all we talk about anymore. So this particular session is very timely for that conversation, because I think we are really on the edge of how do we do things differently in order to not only retain and attract, but help our staff thrive in this particular situation and in our healthcare environment. So I would like to just welcome you to our presentation. We're going to have an interactive chat about managing for morale. This topic for me is both essential and timeless as we witness high rates of staff turnover, burnout, and stress. And regardless of our facility size, the discussion of morale and team culture remains ongoing. I'm really pleased to be joined today by 3 additional leaders in the healthcare industry. So let me just take a second to introduce you to Mike Wiebe. He's the Vice President of Human Resources for Volunteers of America, Oregon chapter. Jason Lesandrini, Assistant Vice President of Ethics, Advanced Care Planning, and Spiritual Health for WellStar Health Systems. And Valdez Bravo, Deputy Director of Operations at Multnomah County Health Department. And I think his title is actually much longer than that. So when he introduces himself, he can tell you much more about himself. As we get started, as Jennifer mentioned, I would just encourage you to post your questions and share your own insights in the chat. And we will definitely save time at the end of the presentation to get to those as best we can. Okay, so I think with that, we will go ahead and get started. Let me share my screen with you. Okay, and let's just see if someone can confirm that you can see my screen.
I think it's coming. There we go.
Beautiful.
You can see it.
Okay, very, very good. All right, so we're gonna go through this here and talk a little bit about me priming the pump for how we want to talk about creating a culture that retains and managing for morale. And for me, that's going to be a series of questions for you. And you can start answering these questions to yourself and think about your environment, how you work as a leader, and what these kind of questions bring up for you in terms of how your staff, or maybe the staff that you need to work with, how does that pull together for you. So in my world, when I am working on culture and working on managing for morale, I start every one of these conversations with an assessment. And I would encourage you to do the same. I feel like if you do not know the answers to these questions, then you probably have a culture problem. And I think culture is what really drives our morale in our healthcare environments. Answering these questions is our roadmap. It is our way to start working on creating a better work culture. And so here they are. I always like to know, how is the team? How is your team getting along? Are they getting along with each other? Are they fighting with each other? I think there's always an age-old saying that people leave the organization because of leaders, but people also leave your organization for these things here, and it's usually because the leader is not addressing it. And so what I would say is, how are we getting along with each other? Are the staff fighting with each other? Are we tolerating some really bad behavior? Are there silos? I think one of the hardest environments I ever work in is when we have so many silos that it doesn't allow us to work effectively with each other, and people get very disgruntled and very frustrated very easily. Think about your workload. Is there inequity in the workload? Are poor performers taking all the attention? And I think, for me, one of the biggest issues, and especially as we see so many new people, young people, people just graduating, coming into the healthcare environment, are we supporting each other or working against each other? And I think that's a really vital question that leaders can ask themselves as you round, as you talk with your team, as you hire people, as you do annual reviews. How are the team working together, and are they actually pulling together as a team? The next question for me is, our leaders, how are people getting along with you as a leader? Are you unapproachable? Are you sitting in your office? Do you ever leave your office? Are you part of the team? Or I have a saying that I use fairly frequently here at work, which is, I am a part of your team. I may be the leader of your team, but I'm also a part of your team. That means I don't get to do it all by myself. You have to help me, and we have to do it together. We make decisions together. We talk about things together. So don't, look at the hierarchy of your leadership. And will staff tell the leader what's going on? I find that the biggest culture problems I have are if staff will not share with the leadership what is happening. If they keep their mouths shut, or if they say, yeah, I've known about that problem for 10 years, that's a huge issue in terms of your culture and the morale of your unit. Let's talk a little bit about communication. I feel like communication could be an entire 90-minute presentation all by itself. And so today, I'm just going to ask you, do people know what's going on in your environment? Are staff kept up to date with changes in the workplace? Or is there even frequent miscommunication? I feel like a lot of times what I tend to work on, especially as a new person to an organization, might be, why are we having so many miscommunications, and what do we need to do to address that? How are people going to talk to each other? Are we closing the loop? Are we ensuring that everybody knows the changes that are happening? So participating in that particular environment. I don't think we can talk enough about psychological safety. I want to really take a couple of minutes to talk about this. And I think we're actually going to talk a little bit more about this later on in the presentation with one of the presenters. But I will say, do staff feel like they can speak up? Do you have what you consider a just culture? Are people afraid of retaliation? And not just from maybe leadership, but maybe peers, maybe other people in the environment. Maybe there's a structure that doesn't allow for a housekeeper to speak up to a physician, or a nurse to talk with the CEO. So what kind of a culture are we allowing and maintaining when it comes to the psychological safety of our teams? And then if people do make a mistake, are they allowed to learn from those mistakes without fear and punishment and embarrassment? And I think I'm a mother of young sons. They're not young, they're in their 20s. And what I always wonder when I'm sending them off into the work environment is someone even going to show them the right way, right? Is there a culture of belittling and saying, how did you make that mistake? Or is someone willing to say, look, this is how we do it, and this is how we want to do it here? And then we have the system, and I always feel like we need to ask questions about the system, because I think in healthcare we have not done enough to really talk about processes, policies, and initiatives that place support around employees' mental, physical, and emotional health. And I would ask you to ask yourself, if you do have these policies, how many of them are mandatory? And I think that that also can create a huge amount of discussion, which is what this day is for. What should be mandatory? Should we have debriefing when we see hard things? Should we ask people to take time off when they've had, a very emotional or stressful day? Should we make people take breaks when they don't want to take breaks? How many of these initiatives are mandatory, and should we have more mandatory? What is our system doing to support us? So I think with that in mind, there's going to be some additional conversations around this, but I think as we've seen, healthcare was maybe not at its best before COVID. And I think COVID really brought all of our glaring issues to light. So what do we need to do as a system to create better processes that support our talent and create a culture that retains, manages for morale? And I'll just leave you with this thought as I start to turn the presentation over to other people. We discussed many issues today that would have never been discussed even 3 years ago. And let's just keep moving forward to create a sustainable healthcare culture. Let's keep the conversation going. All right, very good. With that opening then and all those questions on the table, I would like to turn our presentation over to Mike. and Mike Wiebe, and he is going to take us down a pathway. Mike.
Thank you. Good morning. Once again, my name is Mike Wiebe. I have been serving as the Human Resource Leader at Volunteers of America, Oregon since February 2020. Volunteers of America, Oregon is one of the oldest nonprofit social service agencies in the state of Oregon, and it is known for its solutions for some of the community's most pressing social challenges. That includes substance abuse, behavioral health, mental health, non-substance addiction, domestic violence, family safety, and child and family development. Volunteers of America, Oregon operates inpatient residential treatment facilities, outpatient clinics, and provides services within Portland Public Schools, other community-based organizations, and alongside some of our local strategic healthcare partners. Thank you very much for having me today. If we can go to the next slide. Great. The importance of addressing the challenges faced by our healthcare workforce can't be overstated. As we see on the slide, there is a really significant opportunity regarding the retention of our team members. Recent data underscores the urgency of the issue. According to a report from U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the turnover rate for nurses range between 8.8% and upwards to 37%, depending on the region and nursing specialty. Take that even a step further, nationally, more than half of nurses leave their job within the first 2 years. That's really a stark contrast compared to the median job tenure across all other industries. The issue has been noted amongst physicians as well. So a 2021 survey of approximately 2,500 physicians found a dramatic increase in burnout, with over 60% of physicians reporting feelings of burnout in 2021 compared to 38% in 2020. Healthcare administrators aren't immune to these challenges either. A study reported in the March-April issue of Journal of Healthcare Management found that healthcare administrators had a lower rate of satisfaction with work-life integration compared to the general U.S. working population. In light of these challenges, I think it's really imperative that we prioritize well-being for our healthcare workforce, ensuring that healthcare professionals remain motivated, satisfied, and capable of providing the highest quality care to our patients. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we'll see that the future of healthcare workers is really drastically increasing. And we'll see that largely this is driven by the need for care for our aging population. So over 1/4 or 3.3 million of new jobs in the next 7 years will be in the healthcare and social assistance sector. However, forecasts indicate significant shortage of healthcare workers, including nurses, in over half of the United States by 2026. HRSA, the data on this slide, provides projections for supply and demand of healthcare workers through 2036. Working in the behavioral health sector, I have been closely watching these figures, especially as Oregon has experienced significant constraints for behavioral health workers. According to HRSA, by 2036, the workforce for mental health counselors will only be 62% adequate to the need of the community, while addiction counselors will only be 63% adequate. Beyond behavioral health, the gap is less significant in many classifications, but still critical to address. For example, registered nurses are projected to only meet 91% of the workforce needs, while LPN's availability is projected to only be 88% of the workforce need. Next slide, please. This slide is from the 2023 retention report from the Work Institute, organization specializing in workforce intelligence and retention. It shows that 7.9% of workers who left their employer in 2022 did so because of management issues. While other factors like career development and total rewards also play a role in turnover, management is a significant contributor to staff retention. The Work Institute has found that communication issues within management continue to uptick year over year, further highlighting the need for effective management strategies to retain staff. Next slide, please. In here, this just kind of demonstrates the trends and what that's looked like. And we can see that management has remained steady as a subcategory within this. Next slide, please. With that, the data also highlights when do people leave their employers. So it shows that most people or the largest group of people are at risk of leaving within the first year of employment, with 36.5% of terminations occurring within the first year. This aligns with what the U.S. Chambers of Commerce report found for nurses leaving within the first 2 years. This is significant because it takes so many resources to recruit, train a new team member. And when a new team member leaves, it not only increases costs to the system, but also causes our teams to take on more to continue to serve our clients and patients, further increasing some of the risks that we're experiencing as well. Next slide. At Volunteers of America, we recently completed an organizational assessment to understand our team members' relationship with the organization and their leaders. From that assessment, I believe that there's 5 critical elements for leaders to practice to address communication with team members and build relationships that support the retention of healthcare for workforce. The first one that was really important was promoting transparency. Even if it means sharing difficult or upsetting news, transparency builds trust. In the assessment we completed, staff members reported wanting to know more about how and why decisions that impact their work were made. One of the things that we noted, it's really important to balance transparency by ensuring not to share information that isn't relevant to the team member's success or outside their scope. And so identifying ways to share that information takes careful consideration, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't share that information. The second thing that was really noted was provide and welcome feedback. So regular feedback helps team members understand their performance and areas for improvement. One of the things that we really thought about is what is the balance of that? So ensure to balance feedback between constructive and positive feedback, noting that 5 occurrences of positive feedback to 1 occurrences of constructive feedback is often recommended. Find ways to collect and provide feedback outside of the formal processes. It's important to be in the environment that our team members are working in and being present so that we can give feedback in real time, that we can collect feedback in real time and be able to answer questions in the environment that people are most comfortable to present them. And then in our most recent assessment, staff members reported they felt like leaders were more likely to understand their needs if they regularly saw their leaders in their normal environments. This is in contrast to seeing leaders during formal occasions such as staff meetings or trainings or other places that were scheduled and not outside of the normal work environment. The third area was really based on communication and communicating openly. Open communication ensures that team members are informed and engaged. It helps in addressing concerns promptly and preventing misunderstandings. This means active listening to team members, encouraging them to voice concerns and ideas, and fostering an inclusive atmosphere. Examples include holding regular team meetings where everyone can contribute, using communication platforms that allow for real-time discussion and feedback. I do know we're on a Zoom meeting this morning, and Zoom and Teams have become so ingrained into our normal cadence. However, I find that it's significantly affected our ability to communicate with each other in an open way sometimes. People are afraid to hit the raise hand button. You don't necessarily have the visual cues of when to talk or when to turn it over to someone else. So less Teams and more coffee chats, other ways to connect in person. Build trust. Trust is foundational to any strong relationship. Leaders can build trust by being consistent, reliable, and showing integrity in their actions and decisions. I think there's really a few foundations to that. So consistent follow through. If a leader commits to addressing a concern and implementing a change, they must follow through. For example, if a manager is aware of staffing shortages, taking tangible steps towards the goal sharing about the steps that are taken, communicating what we're doing in that, and communicating about the progress or challenges towards the goal really helps reinforce trust. Visible leadership. So as mentioned earlier, leaders should be present and visible in the workplace, including visiting teams and departments regularly, attending shift handovers, and being approachable during shifts. And then recognizing efforts. So acknowledging and celebrating staff achievements, whether big or small, show appreciation and builds morale. Going back to that 5-to-1 positive feedback to constructive feedback. And this can be as simple as a thank you note. People really appreciate that. I know I always have. Lastly, the assessment really talked about empathy. And they didn't use that word, but understanding and addressing the emotional and professional needs of our team members was really critically drawn attention to in the assessment. So given the prevalence of burnout, exhaustion, work-life integration challenges, we found it's really essential to demonstrate genuine empathy. I recommend that leaders actively seek to understand their team members' needs and ensure their voices are heard and show their concerns are valued. This can be achieved through regular check-ins, providing resources for mental health support, and fostering a culture where work-life balance is prioritized. These strategies have traditionally led to success in the workplace, or the strategies that have traditionally led to success in the workplace are evolving for tomorrow's challenges. Effective leaders excel in fostering relationships because managing people differs fundamentally from managing tasks, processes, or procedures. Each team member brings a unique set of motivations, emotions, connections, and needs spanning a broad spectrum influenced by various factors. Therefore, building a robust relationship with your team members and honing communication skills is really critical in building a resilient workforce capable of meeting the diverse needs of patients. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. Let's move to Jason, please, and he's going to share with us his ethical challenges in healthcare. Jason.
I got to take it off mute. I had to be the person who didn't unmute. My apologies there. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Mike, for an engaging sort of conversation. I think I'm going to take a different path or different sort of maybe direction with some of the conversation that we're having today, which is often a neglected feature in organizations across the country. We talk a lot about, that there are ethical issues that happen in our daily space. We tend to see that those issues go more towards the compliance space, and we fixate on those things. But I'm going to focus more on sort of the issues that our leaders and clinicians face on a daily basis. I should have said, I forgot, I'll introduce myself. I'm Jason Lessandrini. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Ethics, Advanced Care Planning, Spiritual Health, and Language Access Services for Wellstar Health System. Wellstar Health System is the largest integrated healthcare system in the state of Georgia, spanning basically from the east coast of Georgia all the way to the west coast. And we go pretty far south. We're not all the way down to Florida or touching the ocean, but we're pretty close. We provide care. Everything you can think of under the sun falls under our umbrella. Pre-life, afterlife, you name it. We're here to serve our communities. So like I said, next slide, if you will, I'm going to take a different approach in thinking about these ethical challenges that healthcare professionals face. And the reality is that if you didn't know this, all of your team members are facing ethical challenges on a daily basis. They're not, to Mike's point, they might not be speaking them up, or as Kristen says, not be raising those issues up. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit later is what that means for them and how that stuff sits on team members. We know this sort of phenomenon of ethical experiences that our team members really came to fruition in the 1970s. And we had a lot of resources developed during those time, but those resources are utterly underutilized, undertapped to sort of address the issues that they're facing. A study that was done in 1999 showed that the average size hospital with average census, with average everything, the number of ethics issues they identified that were identified was 4 cases that came up per year. That study was redone in the early 2000s and showed the exact same number. So the question is, are there really ethics issues that are happening? Is it that there's not services that are available to team members to address this? And what impact is this actually having on our team members? Next slide, if you will. Because the reality is there are cases like Robert all the time. So if you will, just sit back for a second and sort of let me share a story about a patient. In full disclosure, way more than sufficient information has been changed about this patient for you to ever be able to identify them. So please know that the ethics person is not here to violate HIPAA or patient's privacy. So Robert is a 36-year-old male who came into the hospital and was determined to have Crohn's disease. He got admitted to the ICU because he wasn't able to maintain his airway. He got intubated, he got extubated, was awake, and the surgeons decided that he needed to have a section of his bowel removed. So that first surgery happened without complication, went in, was in the surgical ICU for post-recovery, and he decompensated again, ended up having to be reintubated, ended up having to go back for surgery again within 2 days. Another portion of his bowel was resected. He came back out. Well, let me fast forward 61 days later, the patient is still in the hospital, has now had 13 surgeries for resection of almost the entire intestine. And now the surgeons are looking for a transplant to see if the patient is eligible for a transplant. The patient is wide awake during all of this, quickly comes off the ventilator, is able to interact with the staff, and the patient's family is around all the time, is there every day, night and day, 61 days straight. Every time the surgeons walk into the room, the surgeons talk directly with the patient's family and not directly at the patient. They tell the family, this is what's going on, this is what we're doing. The patient will speak up, the patient will ask questions, and the surgeon redirects their comments to the family every time. So this happens it continues to happen over the course of the patient's care. And so one day, an ethicist that was working at that institution walked up to the floor and was in the ICU and heard a conversation at the nursing desk. And the nurse said to, so this ethicist, whoever that ethicist might be, was a little nosy and decided to go up and engage in the conversation during morning huddle. And this is sort of what basically they had overheard. One of the nurses said, I don't want to take Robert. I just can't take Robert anymore. And the rest of the nurses on the team said, well, I don't want to take Robert either. It's sort of your turn. We've all cycled through Robert. It's time for your turn. And the nurse replied back, I'm willing to take every patient in the unit, so nobody has to work except one other person who will take Robert. And the nurse manager said, of course, we're not going to do that. You know, we have to talk about how we can get this assignment correctly. And it ended up that most of the staff said they didn't want to take it. They found a volunteer to take Robert. So I went up to the nurse afterwards and started having conversations. Come to find out, the nurse said that they couldn't take it anymore. They were very flustered about the conversations that were happening between the family and the surgeon, that the patient wasn't being involved. But the thing that got them the most was all the nursing staff believed they knew the outcome for this patient, which was they were not going to leave the hospital. They were not going to receive a transplant, and that eventually they would die of sepsis, cardiac arrest, whatever it may be. And so I was sitting there talking with this nurse, and the nurse said to me, the real reason that I can't take Robert is because the last time I took Robert, I went in and Robert was crying. And I asked Robert what was the matter. And Robert was really silent and didn't say anything for a while. And then finally he spoke up and he said, do you think that will be me? And the nurse said, well, what do you mean? Who will be you? He said, I heard that siren go off above and all the people run into another patient's room next door to his. And then he saw 3.5 hours later, the patient come out, but was not alive, had come out in the way that the bodies were transported out of the ICU. And Robert said, "Do you think that's how I'm going to leave the hospital?" And the nurse looked at Robert and said, "I'm trying to do everything I can for you, Robert." And so we started talking about that. And the nurse said, I know what's going to happen to Robert. We all know what's going to happen to Robert. Robert's going to pass away in this hospital, but Robert's not getting the information Robert needs in order to sort of think about the life that he has left, that either the surgeons are not communicating with him, or I don't feel like it's my place to actually step in. And so I'm experiencing this moral tension and moral dilemma, and I'm having sort of psychological distress. And that case was impacting the morale of the whole unit. Everybody on that unit knew what was going to happen to Robert, knew the situation that was going on, but no one could seem to either break through to have the surgeons have a different kind of conversation, to be able to speak up, or, as it were, as Kristen pointed out, or to be in a psychologically safe space where we can have these kinds of conversations. So fast forward, it ends up happening as the nurse predicted. Robert died. Robert died in the hospital. And every nurse on the floor went to Robert's funeral. And so I tell this story because I think these kinds of things are happening to our staff and impacting the morale and impacting the unit morale more than we let on. This isn't just an acute care space problem. This is a problem in spaces where people take care of each other. And that's healthcare at large. Next slide. And so what that kind of leads to, and what this nurse and the team was experiencing, is a phenomenon that we like to sort of talk a little bit about, but I'll show you, I don't think we're doing much about it, is this phenomenon of moral distress, which someone experiences a moral event and it's directly causally, there's some causal relationship, direct causal relationship with the psychological stress that an employee or a team member may feel. And the data is pretty clear that this is happening across the country with nurses, that COVID heightened the experience of moral distress. But what I like to say, akin to what I think Kristen may have said in the beginning, is a lot of the issues that we're experiencing in healthcare were here before COVID. They just sort of had a lot of dust on them, and we decided not to talk about them. Now it seems like we're ready to actually talk about them, to dust them off, to really engage them, because I think moral distress is a big phenomenon that's happening across all healthcare enterprises, where employees are having these experiences, and we're now sort of opening the door for them to sort of talk through them. There was a study that was done in 2001 that looked at, I think the number was 11 or 10% of nurses left the nursing profession due to moral distress. They supposedly redid that study, but never published it, and found out that that actually came true. And it actually might be worse for the next 10 years. And then, of course, we had COVID, and I think that didn't sort of help anything. There are lots of things that we know about moral distress. Next slide, if you will. And these can be sort of simple things about what the causes of moral distress are. We know it's a moral event, but it can be internal or external to the team member. It can be a nurse who experiences it. It can be PT, OT. It can be anybody. The reality I like to say is it's about anyone who cares actually has the ability to experience moral distress. For those of us who don't care, you may be in the wrong profession or working in the wrong industry, but my sense is those who care tend to experience this more, and they can experience it because of internal things about fear of reprisal or not having courage to stand up. It can be external things to them about the unit culture, the way things develop, the way conversations happen, who's in power, how authority gets handled. But ultimately, what we know is it leads to this sort of phenomenon that's on the screen, that when we're not actively engaging in addressing moral distress, we tend to see a thing that's already sort of been spoken about a little bit today, but we see this phenomenon happen. And so I'll try and describe this really quickly, this diagram. So if you see on the far left side moral distress, if you imagine we measured it in units, And then underneath is time. And so imagine you have a morally distressing event, you see the number go up. The distressing event does go away. Eventually it goes away. Either the team member quits, or the patient dies, or the situation's gone, whatever it may be, it goes away. But what we know, the research is pretty clear, is that it doesn't go away for the person who experienced the event. It actually sits with them. It dissipates slightly, and then we have this moral residue that sits with people. And given that we work in an environment where it's caring, we know it's going to happen again. And so it does, and it happens again, but you're now not at your previous baseline. You're actually at a new baseline, and that goes up from there. And these events keep happening over and over and over again. And far off to the right is a phenomenon we know all too well now in healthcare, is about burnout, but it's a particular kind. It's burnout from moral issues. It's not burnout from some of the other things that we see. A related phenomenon, next slide, if you will, is a lot of conversation happening in the world today is around moral injury. And I think these happen in a similar fashion, but moral injury really started in the military. That's where it came out of. It's about sort of like a psychological distress that results from sort of a direct violation of who you are as an individual. So it can be that there's some overlap between moral distress and moral injury, but we see moral injury happening more about direct violations. Like, I'm a care provider, you're asking me to document for 60 minutes of my 59-minute encounter with a patient. That's against who I am at my core. And these things coupled together are really, I think, driving a lot of the morale that we're seeing on units, because a lot of ethics issues are happening regularly and maybe more frequently, but we're not doing anything actively to engage it. Next slide. And so what do we do? I'm not here to be the bearer of bad news, but the reality is there is no real clear solution to fix this stuff. There have been lots of things that have been offered, some stuff. So there are sort of moral distress consult services that have been developed. There, Schwartz rounds has been used. Being conscious and actively engaged in the workloads that we put on our providers and what that may mean for them and who they say they are as professionals. And so I don't want to be such a Debbie Downer, but the reality is I'm not sure a lot of those things are actually addressing it. I think the same thing we see a lot of is about working on resilience. So we see people working a lot in this space about creating more resilient providers. And what I'll say is I'm not a fan of the resilience movement, not because I don't think people should be resilient, but I think healthcare providers are in fact some of the most resilient people that we know in this country, and do some of the most impressive work, and they're still experiencing it. So to me, it's not about moral resilience. It's about sitting through and processing with team members what that means. I've done some work myself on this and studied it a little bit, and have found that, I think even some of the points that Mike said, it's about open conversations with our team members more often than not. It's a lot about engaging appropriate resources like ethics consultants to engage and work on that stuff. Next slide. But I think a lot of it has to do with sort of Kristen's point about culture. So I'm not going to belabor what culture actually is. I think Kristen did a great job about this, but there is a particular slice of culture that we need to be thinking about. Next slide, if you will, which is about the ethical culture. That's a piece of the pie that we need to actively engage more intently than we are doing now. A lot of the engagement surveys that we use across organizations sort of get on the peripheral of ethical culture and looking at the way ethics impacts how organizations run, not from so more from a compliance-based perspective about, did we report these conflict of interest? Do I think my leader is ethical? And those things are important, and I'll talk about them in a second. But really, we need to be digging more into sort of the ethical culture about how do people sort of raise concerns about ethical conflicts or uncertainties they're experiencing. Do they have resources available to them to actually address them in the moment? Are we relying too much on EAP programs to sort of, well, let it happen to you and then we'll address it on the back end? And I don't think that's the right way to do it. Next slide, if you will. I think the better way to do it is for us to think actively about what ethical culture looks like. And this is an example from Linda Trevino about the components of ethical culture. And a number of these things are exactly what Mike and Kristen talked about what executive leadership, how do you speak to values, how do you align with all of those things? And then there are, remember, just because there are formal systems in place, there are also informal systems in place too that we have to be attuned to. A lot of the work that we do in assessment of these things is about formal structures. You have to start somewhere, but also making sure that those informal systems happen as well. So next slide, if you will, because I think I have one more. I think the big thing that I'd like folks to take away from my sort of point is, I think one, we need to start measuring it. I think we actually have to get in this space, start working on how we're measuring moral injury, moral distress. If folks want to reach out to me, I can talk more about that with them if there's ways to do that. But I think it's time to step up and try and measure, right? Time to actually look at it. And the key with anything in medicine is if you're going to look at it, if you're going to measure it, if you're going to scan it, if you're going to test for it, then you got to be willing to do something about it. So please, if you're going to measure it, do something about it. All right, Kristen, I'm going to hand it back to you. I'll look forward to the group's questions. I just want to thank everybody again for the opportunity to be here today. And then last but not least, being the sole Georgian in the room today, I appreciate the Oregon team reaching out to me and giving me this opportunity to be here. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Jason. What a very powerful story about Robert. And I have looking forward to questions a little bit later on. I'm sure there'll be many. And let me finally round this out by turning it over to Valdez, who I think is going to take us down a little bit more of a leadership pathway and how leaders can continue to address the issues of culture, morale, and retaining staff.
All right. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for being here. Jason's in Georgia. He said he's been up for about 5 hours before the start of this, but a lot of you just got up. You're still having that first cup of coffee and wiping the sand out of your eyes as you're getting some heavy duty learning from Oregon ACHE. So thank you for being here. And thanks to Kirsten for moderating and fellow panelists, Jason and Mike. I'm not only a panelist today, but I'm a president of Oregon ACHE. So I'm so thankful for this awesome learning event that Jenny Will, our program chair, and the others have organized. And what an important conversation, managing for morale. And I really appreciate the lineup here because, Kirsten did such a good job laying out the, kind of defining the, the what and the landscape and the universe we're operating here, culture, employee culture. Mike kind of bring that HR perspective to see like what the trend lines show. 10 years ago when I was in grad school, we were talking about the silver tsunami. We knew that we were going to have more people leaving the workforce at the same time, that double whammy of needing more care. And then COVID happened. And through, a lot of people that might have stuck with us or retirement off a little bit longer because they were doing what they loved, decided to leave. And then people started seeing that moral injury and the moral distress that Jason's talking about, and it's pervasive today as we do still have these critical shortages and we're facing hospital and birthing center closures and all these kind of things that are impacting us in very real ways. Corporate medicine, making decisions on the bottom line and impacting care access. It's hard times to be in healthcare, but never a more important time also. So the way we're going to end today before we go to your questions is I'm just going to talk about my thoughts on what we can do about it. Sometimes at the end of the day, I think that you can't control. There's things that we are, as healthcare leaders, that we are contending with that we are out of our control. But the more we can show that leadership on the ground and communicate about it, it does mitigate the fallout and damage of that. And I'm going to talk about that. So my name is Valdez Bravo, he, him, his pronouns. Deputy Director of Operations at the Multnomah County Health Department for about 2 years now, going on 2 years. July 16th will be my 2-year work anniversary. In that time, I've already served as interim director for 9 months. I went back to my deputy director role. Now I'm actually serving as the interim director of our Corrections Health Division since my birthday, back on May 13th. All right, so next slide. Just a little bit about me. I'm a native Oregonian, grew up in Salem, Cherry City, USA. I'm Latinx, Standing Rock Sioux descent. My grandma was a tribal member, Army veteran, Operation Enduring Freedom and OIF. And that's relevant because a lot of my leadership and communication was really rooted in my times as a non-commissioned officer for 8 years in the Army. I'm a husband, I'm a dad, activist, organizer, volunteer, served on the PCC school board. So some, communication at that kind of global enterprise level as a board member, lifelong public servant, started out as a biomed tech, crossed over to leadership about 10 years ago when the VA sent me to grad school. I am a lean black belt, so you're going to get a nice healthy dose of some lean stuff in here, because I think the name of the game for communication, lean, is not about process improvement and just efficiencies. It's about culture transformation if you do it right. And communication is a key part of that. And I was at the VA prior to coming to the county for about 18 years. And you know, the VA, best care anywhere. If you look at the quality metrics and the objective criteria, but one of those things is the VA is leading the way, being on a high reliability journey, high reliability organization. That's all about psychological safety and culture, and translating that into morale and engagement, communication, and positive patient outcomes. Happy nurses, happy staff. That's what I always say. And so I know that that's why a lot of us are here today. Again, president of Oregon ACHE, and I'm also president of Healthcare for All Oregon, who's expanding healthcare access around the state. All right, next slide. So I always tell the panelists, hey, feel free to put a brag slide or two in about your organization. So I thought I'd take myself up on that offer. Multnomah County Health Department, we are the 9th largest provider of healthcare in Oregon. We're located up here in, yes, you guessed it, Multnomah County. And we have public health, behavioral health, corrections health, our integrated service division, which is our largest federally qualified healthcare centers, FQHC set in Oregon. So we have about 50,000 clients. That's why we're like the 9th largest provider. And then we also have our health officer division, medical examiner, and overseeing our EMS system. Our values, our mission is working with communities to advance health equity, protect the most vulnerable, and promote health and wellness for everyone. And that's everyone. And I want to say happy Pride Month, because it's June 28th. I think it's this anniversary of Stonewall today. So happy Pride Month, and maybe I'll see you at that on Pride Parade next month. Vision, thriving communities that nurture the health and resilience of all. And our values are compassion and care, empowerment, racial equity, connection, integrity. I feel like all 5 of these things go into the factors of managing for morale. All right, go ahead. Next slide. All right, so these are some fun pictures. I was inspired. I wasn't going to do slides, but then Jason and Mike had such great slides, and Kirsten, she was the first. I thought I'd throw some slides in. So these are some pictures. A lot of people don't think about health careers. This is not a recruiting thing for me right now, but a lot of people don't think about careers in public health and health departments. And so I just want to show some fun pictures of the health department in action. And hopefully they'll be reflective of things that raise morale, because I showed pictures of the fun stuff. I didn't show pictures of us having a bad time. But there's just some pictures of us at whatever our NAIA event, or our Native American Future Generations collaborative events. We go partner organizations like Project Access Now. It's Dr. Nandita Gupta, who's also looking at being an ACHE member. PSU, OHSU, PSU graduation, Veterans Day Parade. Next slide. Getting out in the community, our last vaccination event there with NAIA in the top left. Working community in the Rockwood community in Gresham on the right. Proclamations for suicide prevention, and doing that public facing work with the board. All right, next slide. Oh, you guys, this is us at Pride Month last year. It's going to be a good time. Hopefully it's sunny weather and I don't get sunburned like I did last year. That was not a good public health measure. I did not wear enough sunblock. All right, last slide pictures. And then just, getting together. That's Partners in Diversity, say, hey, welcoming diverse folks to the community that we go to once a quarter. And that was me with a big smile on my face, because we're assuming big oil here. All right, so next slide. Let's go back to the core topic. All right, so the 2 most important factors of success. Now, this is me talking, but y'all invite me to panelists, so I get to say my thoughts here. Leadership and communication. And this is something I say again and again to my teams. And it's kind of nice, because at the health department, I oversee when I'm not overseeing care in the jails, I oversee the human resources department, right? The most important department, right? Human resources are people. Everything else is secondary to being able to do what we do. And and I also see our communications and marketing team. So I'm like in hog heaven over here, because I think the 2 most important factors of success in managing morale in any organization and achieving outcomes are leadership and communication. And what I like to tell my people, my friends, coworkers at work, is you can be the best leader in the world. You can be General, Dwight D. Eisenhower, or name some awesome leader. You can be Obama. You can be the best leader in the world. But if that leadership and those insights are stuck in your head, or stuck in your office, and they're confined to the C-suite, that leadership vision and message is not being communicated out to the staff, and it won't do the staff any good. You gotta get it out there. It's like having the packet Kool-Aid. You know, it's great if it's in the packet. You got to dump it in the pitcher and add water and get it out there to folks. And the key reason that a lack of communication, in my mind, in my experience, tends to exist is usually a lack of leadership. If you can have the leadership, but if you lack leadership, there's not going to be a sense that, hey, I need to probably be up in my communication. And I always say, in a large organization, the bigger the organization, the more times you got to say things. 7 times, 7 places, 7 ways. So if you got something that really gets out there, don't, you know, obviously we're not just sending out the one email or mentioning it on the morning huddle and that's it. It's the morning huddle, it's the afternoon huddle, it's the swings, it's the all staff, it's the internet site, it's the newsletter, all the places and spaces, asking your folks, drill this down in your staff meetings, you know, roll it out. So leadership and communication. And what basically what I'm going to focus on really is more the communication side, because I'm talking to a bunch of leaders, and I think we have strong leaders on this call. But there's, like I said, you can never over communicate in my mind. Now you know, maybe find that balance between transparency, like Mike was talking about. You know, I don't want to freak my staff out about every little thing that comes down the pipe that might affect us. I want to balance that, but I do want to give them timely information. All right, next slide. So going back to my Army days. Field Manual 22-100, Army leadership. The Army talked about how there were 4 factors of leadership, and they were really the leader, those being led, the situation, and communication. So again, you know, you're always going to have, you know, I would say one person by themselves, you know, is just a person. As soon as you have one person that's kind of following you, you are a leader. So whether it's a small team or a large team, the leader, the led, there's going to be some kind of situation, might be clinical, like in Robert's case. It might be a budget situation. It could be an emergency management situation. There's always going to be some kind of situation. And communication is going to be that 4th leg of the stool. All right, next slide. So this was, remember, staying for the promotion board. One of the Army leadership nuggets I took away was one of the questions. You had to like sit before the promotion board, you know, Sergeant Brown reporting to the president of the board as directed. And you had to answer all these questions about how to dig a toilet in the bushes to, you know, how fast an M16 round went, to things like communication. And one of them was, what is the result of too little communication? And the board answer was, it breeds resentment, it leads to rumors, and it stifles morale. And I know you all have seen that. You have all seen that in action. And I've had recent situations where there's leadership turnover, or somebody's, you know, that's always a hard thing, right? So maybe there's some kind of disciplinary action. Everyone's asking, what's going on with so-and-so? The HR line is, you know, I can't tell you, you know, it's their business. But, you know, there are ways that you can try to find a way to get more information and a little bit of updates, or even just saying, you know, there's a situation going on. I'm not at liberty to be able to talk to you about it, but do know that as soon as I can provide an update, I will. Sometimes just saying that is enough to you know, kind of settle nerves. But I like this little picture here. Low morale is obviously dissatisfaction, lack of interest, and an unwillingness to work. So this is so important. All right, next one. So my hypothesis here, put my Bill Nye the Science Guy hat on, is leadership plus communication equals high morale. So if leaders develop, hone, and grow their leadership, just like y'all are doing here by spending time earning 1.5 CEUs on an Oregon ACHE webinar, get 3 face-to-face at our fall conference. But if you all, you know, if the leaders in general develop, hone, and grow their leadership potential, and they translate that leadership into regular, transparent, systematic, but also personalized, not just the newsletters, but also this personalized. I love it when the CEO sends out a heart-to-heart to the staff, and personalized communication with staff. Then we expect increased employee engagement, increased retention, improved morale, lower turnover, reduced burnout, and of course, reduced vacancies as a result of that. And because we just did all that, we'll have improved outcomes across not only clinical domains, but administrative domains like audits and reports and, you know, all those kind of things, and our fiscal domains as well. You know, there's a reason that, you know, they'd say like the more diverse the board of an organization, the better the fiscal outcomes. Obviously, the higher morale and employee engagement, the better the outcome is going to be. So I really just feel like it's just funny. I feel like I can't overstate how much, how important communication. I've just seen it be the undoing of so many leaders, of so many organizations, and so many situations. And I've made mistakes as well. And as long as we learn from them and counter them, that's the name of the game. All right, now as we wrap up my piece here, head to the next slide. I want to talk about going back to lean. I mentioned that I'm a lean black belt, love lean. And when you talk about it, I was actually able to poach some of my slides from my VA lean journey. Thank you, VA Portland Healthcare System. And basically, when we think about ideal state information flow, you have your staff up there, your worker bees, and sometimes there's a lead, they're getting paid a little bit more. They're not like necessarily supervising and rating people, but they're getting the word out. They're like air traffic control and divvying up the work and who's on first and what's on second. You got that supervisor who is like got their arms wrapped around all that. And then you have a manager who's supporting a number of supervisors and programs. And then that's the hard part, right? Being that manager, and maybe some of you on this call are in that manager role, because you're accountable up and down. You're like trying to keep the folks up in the C-suite happy that got all these big initiatives, endeavors, and they're telling you that, we got to cut cost or we're going to have to lag hiring and all these kind of things. But you also still need to get your HEDIS measures up and all that kind of stuff. And then you got your staff that are like, hey, I can only do what I can do. And we, Bob and Jill left and nobody's replaced Bob and Jill. And now that's on me and I'm burning out. And so it's so tough to be in that middle role manager. But that's really like that manager role is the go-between. That's where the communication, you've got to have that communication out of the C-suite with your CEO and your vice presidents and your deputy directors. Pick a title depending on the type of organization you are. But the manager, the communication that goes to them. How many times have you seen it where you're, maybe some of you are at the executive space? Didn't we talk about that at our board meeting or our C-suite meeting? And it doesn't seem to get out because sometimes it'll go to that manager and they're so burnt out and harried and fighting fires that they don't take that extra step to communicate it out. Or they're not like you and they haven't come to understand the importance of communication, or they don't have those skills. Maybe they don't have venues or structural huddles and things set up built in. I mean, I've met staff that they don't even have a regular one-on-one schedule with their folks. They kind of do it as needed. I just feel like that regular recurring planful communication block time, it holds us accountable. It means you don't have to look for the time because it's already on our calendar. And then you have a place to just, and I like to just keep the open agenda. Keep an open agenda where as things come up and people have questions or updates, just populate the agenda. And by the time you get to the meeting, it runs itself. But that's really kind of like what, from this lean perspective, like these different layers of the organization and where the information sharing is happening. And then the next slide is more about how we can enhance that. So you've got these de facto layers, but we also don't want to just by emailing and chatting each other. So sometimes you got to get out of the office. You got to take it beyond obviously email. Go to the Gemba. And my lean friends on here will recognize that term, but it's a Japanese term which means the real place, or where the action takes place, where the value is added to a product, or where the value is created. So in the most practical sense, lean attempts to make everything in the environment Gemba or value added process or location. And the antonym of Gemba is muda or waste, which lean practitioners do everything to eliminate. So if I'm on that factory room floor and I'm up and watching them build cars, because a lot of this comes out of Japanese manufacturing, where someone's like assembling the parts and building the Toyota Tundra, that is where the value is taking place. It's not up in the control room where I got my coffee and my spreadsheets and my dashboards. That's important too. That's why we get paid the big bucks to oversee it. But you got to put on that hard hat if you're in a factory, and you got to walk down and talk to the staff sometimes. How's it going? What's getting in your way? How are you feeling? And what can I do to keep you here? Purposeful rounding. Going to the Gemba to understand the work, but also that purposeful rounding. All right, next slide. So some Gemba activities are and this is again, I poached this slide from our old trainings that we used to do when we were training our lean folks. But what is how often should someone go to the Gemba? There's this thing about and it's called, sometimes people probably go into the Gemba and lean. Sometimes it's MBWA, management by walking around, or sometimes people say management by wandering around. People are like, what's the difference between that? I feel like the difference between management by walking around and management wandering around is wandering can be kind of nice because it's unexpected, it's spontaneous. Hey, I got my 30-minute meeting just canceled. I'm just gonna go for a walk around the campus, talk to people, bump into them. And there's kind of a randomness to it, which can be kind of nice and beautiful at times. But sometimes you can have it more like, you know, your rounds. When I was at the VA down in White City, we had a 4-person executive team, and our organizational development team sliced and diced all the units up into a spreadsheet, and we each, you know, this week I'm taking pharmacy and supply chain, and the director is taking you know, home-based primary care and lab, and we just divvy it up. And so there's kind of a cadence just to make sure there's equity and that we were getting around and covering all the bases. But the other thing is, rather than just going around, and it's not just like a you know, waving a hand and like, you know, just chatting it up and wow, you see the Seahawks game last night? It's like, you know, it's more about the work, and it's like, hey, how's it going? Like first they're like, wow, the boss is here. When I got here to the health department, they're like, oh, you're the first director that ever came actually to the jails and like met with us. You know, you got to get out to, even if there's bars, you got to get to the site. And then the other thing was like the conversations. We do purposeful rounding as you're going to the Gemba. You're picking up things about the operation, but you know, I like to say, there's 3 questions I like to ask. What's one thing that keeps you coming back every day? Oh, well, you know, for me, it's the mission, and I just can't get enough. For me, it's my team. I love this team. Or, you know what? I really like the direction this organization's going. Or, I love my patients. You hear all kinds of things. So, like, what's the one thing that keeps you come back every day? It's like a little mini stay interview on the go. And then the second one is, okay, what's one thing that if we don't change it, you're going to leave this place? You know, what's going to drive you? What's driving you nuts? What's going to drive you away? Oh, and it could be something as simple as that dang printer is so old and takes forever to print, or our scheduling system is so funky. Or it could be my boss is like, you know, a micromanager. You're going to hear all kinds of things, right? And then I like to end it kind of where Mike's talking about, you know, that positive style. What's one thing that keeps you, or sorry, who's somebody that you would like to recognize? Is there somebody you would like to recognize today? You know, Mike Levy, he's the head of HR, but he always makes time for me. And, you know, I had a payroll question and he was able to get it fixed in 2 days. That was really nice of me, you know, write down. And then next time you're in some kind of public space, maybe where Mike's at, or on an email and you're reflecting on the week and your CEO thoughts, whatever, you drop a thing like that. That is building culture. And what's really cool, Simon Sinek has a cool thing about this, is it's like when you do that, when somebody like expresses, whether it's at an all staff or a board, or if you have a kudos, and somebody expresses that kind of that kudo and feedback, they feel good. They get like the person receiving that compliment gets, you know, that validation gets a dopamine hit. And the person giving it feels good. Like, I mean, I'm the type of person in the holidays, I giving better than giving presents, right? You get that dopamine hit. Exactly. And then guess what? You're at a staff meeting, or you're just simply reading an email and you see kudos going across the board for each other, from like the nurse to the nurse manager, or vice versa, or the intake clerk to the doc. You see that kudos, you get a bystander hit. So it's good vibes all the time. And all this can translate. All this can be longitudinal. Leader makes the priority. I'm going to get out of the office. I'm going to block time on my calendar, 30 minutes to go to the Gimbo at least once a week. You go to a different site. You have these purposeful random questions. You come back and you do something with it. And that's the next slide here, Kristen, is basically what do you do with it? So, okay, now you've gone out there, you've gone, you know, divisional leaders are going more regularly. Like supervisors are living in the Gimbo, right? You don't have to say, hey, go to the Gimbo. They're like, where do you think I live? Divisional leaders, you know, they got to go often. Service leadership, you know, maybe a little less often because you're busy running stuff, and you know, the executives need to get out. But when you do it, then like just have a place to share, to roll the information up to whether it's a tiered huddle, whether it's baking it back into your executive decision making, or whether it's sharing kudos at some kind of some meeting. So do something with it. I think Jason said it best. If you're gonna measure it, do something with it. If you're gonna go to the GIMB and ask them what they think, do something with that. All right, next slide. So it's just some considerations before we wrap up, because we really value the question and answer portion of this. And please do drop any questions for Mike, Jason, Kirsten, or myself in the chat, and Kirsten's going to get those. But just thinking about, you know, how do you go to the Gimbo when you have many sites of care? It's tough, but you can do it. I had 13 primary care sites from Bend to the beach in Vancouver, Washington to Salem. We went to the Gimbo. It's a chore. You got to plan for it. You got to build in transit time even. But, you know, it is so important. You do not want your outlying clinics to feel like they are not seen, valued, heard, and part of the family. How do you do it for your virtual teams? Drop in. Sometimes you can get your virtual teams, you know, create a shared calendar where they just put all the staff meetings and then pop in. Now, sometimes that can be scary, you know, if it's not normalized. That's the other thing. If you start going to the Gimba, it might be weird at first because they're going to be like, why is the boss here? Like, what did we do wrong? Like, are we getting shut down? But after a while, it's like, hey, Valdez, hey, you're back. Hey, how's it going? When's it? You know, I haven't seen you in a minute. Or, did you bring donuts in? You know, that kind of stuff. So you build, you normalize it. But you can do that on virtual teams too and pop in and visit with them. How do you connect with staff who are working on site and at home? You just got to be intentional. You got to meet them where they're at. If they're a hybrid team, hit it with that when they're on the on-site day. Sometimes we have big on-site days where they kind of find the mix of remote work and the water cooler action on Tuesday or something. How do you do an all staff when everyone is remote? We've had all remote all staffs. I think a lot of people are moving in that direction. It's like Mike said, sometimes people are already shy of speaking, but they don't want to come off mute. But it is possible. And then measuring the effectiveness techniques, whether it's 360 reviews, peer kudos and recognition, shout outs at huddles, pulse surveys, all employee surveys, press Gainey. It's all measurable, but do something with it. So with that, I'm going to wrap and turn it back over to Kristen for the questions. Thank you all so much for having me here.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Valdez. So much to learn about leadership there. I think in the interest of time, we have 20 minutes left for questions. And I think I'll just do a very quick recap. When we talked significantly about the different pillars of leadership, we talked about the ethics of managing for morale in terms of burnout and stress and all those topics with Jason. And we also talked about the essential relationship building actions with Mike, building trust. And we had a lot of talk about communicating openly, providing feedback, all the pillars that Mike discussed in his section. I think I'd like to start out the questions by just asking the three of you, what do you think is one thing then that people can take home today and actually implement immediately? Because many of these things are going to be systems that we have to create and really work towards. But is there something that people can immediately start today that you would recommend?
I'll go first. I'll just say, again, if you are already going to the Gemba and doing proposal rounding and getting out of the office and going and connecting with frontline staff, awesome. But maybe survey around and think about maybe some of your supervisors and managers who either because they're so freaking busy or maybe they're just like, a little bit more on the introverted side and that's not their jam. It's got to be their jam. So just like find those folks and coach, mentor them to success to be able to do that. They say, if you want to know what matters to an organization, look at their budget and how they spend their money. That's the true sense of their values. But if you want to look at a leader and what they value and prioritize and their values, check their calendar, see where they're spending their time. So if you don't see that Gemba time on there, might need to think about it.
Yeah, really good. Jason, you talked a lot about burnout being so prevalent, and moral distress is something that we hear frequently now when we just look at what nurses and clinicians are saying in general. Do you recommend that we have some policies around intervening with moral distress? I think one of the reasons we don't is because there is fear as a leader about how we intervene in that conversation. And do we even have the skills to do it? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback on Valdez's comment here too. I think it's going to segue into each other. So first, to answer the first question that you were asking the group, because I think you got to take an assessment of where you're at organizationally, right? Especially when it comes to, I come from an ethics perspective, so that's what I think about a lot. Like, how are our ethics resources doing? Are they adequately staffed? Are they adequately trained? Do we have access? I mean, there's a lot of things that go into that. So assessing that. And then I think, just to your bigger point about moral distress, what I have found is responses to moral distress by untrained people make the distress worse. It makes it actually worse. You're trying to make it better. So you'll say, oh, you can throw, you can put a psychologist on that. No disrespect to psychologists. Like, you can put a psychologist on that. Yeah, I think they can touch that. But there's something unique about the moral distress that's sort of people who self-promoting work in this space, like myself, can recognize that's different and unique, right? This is about values tensions for folks. My experience over the 20 plus years that I've done this work and worked in moral distress is that people actually want it. They want a space where they can process it. The people who don't want to speak up won't come. but I've hosted in my own organization, I've hosted in other organizations, I've worked with organizations to create structures and be a resource. People show up. Like I always think, oh, it's gonna be like one or two people come, and it is never one or two people. It's always, a room full. Hey, where's the lunch? No, there's no lunch, and then they still want to stay, and there's a conversation that sort of takes place. So I think what we need to make sure we're doing is we know what resources we have available, and when there are gaps, that we're actually working towards filling those gaps so that trained people can actually respond to that work.
Thank you. Mike, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I think I want to piggyback a little bit on what Valdez talked about. If you're not doing it already, look, a month out, 2 months out, block that time off on the calendar, because there's always going to be crises that come up, and really be intentional on making sure you're having that time to go out. Like I said, in our most recent assessment, um, team members said, yeah, we see our leaders on Teams, we join these events, and they really found the most important interactions with leaders were those in-person interactions. To what Valdez and everybody else has talked about, is that being able to authentically get information in real time of what is happening within the clinic or the environment is really so key. And then being able to circle back to that, and really holding that trust commitment to come back to people, to either say, hey, we don't have the budget right now to replace that printer, or here's when that printer is going to be replaced, or here's the tools and resources that we can do. Working in behavioral health, we have licensing requirement clinical supervision, to really be able to debrief. And one of the things that we're looking at is expanding our trauma-informed care practices to trauma-informed supervision, really integrating that into our supervision of our team members as well. There's a fine balance of how do we do that? How do we provide the support for our staff members, particularly our peer mentors, and staff members that are really on the front line of individuals that may be experiencing overdoses, loss, other aspects. But really, I think in the next year, roughly, integrating that trauma-informed supervision will really help address some of the moral injury aspects that Jason's talking about as well, and give our leaders more tools on how to respond to those things. Because right now, I think a lot of times it doesn't get addressed because they just don't know what to say. They don't have the tool.
Kristen, can I jump in? Mike made me think about a conversation I had with my child a couple days ago. And I imagine a lot on this call have been in these spaces. So my son had gone away and done something, came back. We're at dinner, and I asked him, so what'd you do today? And he said, oh, nothing. I said, no, I know that's not true. Like, so what did you do? And he would say, no, it wasn't really anything. And then when I pushed, or got a little deeper, he ended up telling me how the day went. And Mike said something, that when we go to and being an authentic leader, we also have to realize ourselves when our teams say nothing, we have to be careful to recognize, is it really nothing? Is there really nothing going on? Or is it the case that they just don't want to tell us what it is? So I noticed this with my older boy. He will tell my wife everything. For me, he won't say, he'll say nothing. It was nothing. How was school today? Oh, it was normal. What did you do? The normal things. And then she could ask the exact same question. And he's like, well, so when at 8:05 we did this, at 8:07 we did that. And we'll have a different response. And I think as leaders, if we're going to try and manage for morale, we have to be cognizant that there may be people on our teams who are not in the space where they feel like they can speak up to me, to the point of, to Valdez's point about joining a Zoom. There may just be people there who are never going to tell you really what's at the heart of things, or you have to build that relationship where they can actually do that. But I think as leaders, we need to recognize when someone says nothing is really the matter, not to deny them, but question, is this really the case? Is there really nothing that's going on?
Really good point. Very interesting. Before I get to the chat, I would love to ask, I think, just one more sort of global question. And for me, there's a combination at the leadership level for most of us that is a combination of getting your tasks done. And there are so many tasks. And really, the systems that we work in don't allow us to not do those tasks. So we have this leadership push and pull, right? Between how do we get things done and get our people to perform, as well as see this maybe softer skills, right? Which are actually hard skills, this piece of, I think if I focus on my people, maybe my tasks will get done. But we don't seem to all have that vision and that view in leadership. And I think that our systems have not set us up for that. So, with that in mind, what are your thoughts on how we really work to change our system? I think there's a lot of resistance there, right? That it's the productivity and it's getting people and it's turning over patients very quickly. It's all those pieces which make it sometimes harder to just stop and say, are you okay?
I'll offer one quick thing. I can't share my screen, because there's not enough time, but I developed a rubric just for my own direct reports that I came with. It kind of looks like something you get out of a textbook. I tried to make it look like that, make it look legit. But basically what it is it's to let my supervisors and stuff know off the, they're off the hook for some of the meetings, and for some of my managers to know that they need to delegate more and do less as an individual contributor. So like I've been saying I call it doing, meeting, deciding levels of responsibility. And when I say doing, I mean like job duties, training, your own professional development, things you're doing on your own. And I have a range where line staff really, I want them doing things like 80% of the time and only in like 10% of meetings and deciding 10%. Supervisor, I think 50% of the times they should actually be doing like actually work, rolling up their sleeves. 30% means a little bit more, 20% deciding. Managers, 30% doing, 50% meetings, and 20% deciding. We're all deciding. And then me as an executive, if I'm doing things like 10% of the time, I'm making things and doing things like this little rubric, but 70% of the time I'm in meetings, and I count that as going to the Gemba as well. And I'm deciding things about 20% of the time. So I just got to do that because one, I want line staff to not be stuck in a ton of meetings. There's this thing about why work doesn't happen from years ago. It was the M&Ms, the managers in meetings. I want line staff freed up to not be bogged down, or me walking around like Lumberg on Office Space talking about how it's going. But I also, as an executive, or my managers, if I see them like doing so much individual contributing that they can't do the management side that I need them to be doing, I need them to delegate more or make a business case to me on why they need to expand their span of control so they have more troops to do the work. So that's just my answer on that one.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. I talk regularly about there being three kind of pillars of management: task management, people management, and relationship management. And that mixture kind of varies depending on what level you're at. So kind of where Valdez talked about, a line supervisor might have more task management than an executive leader. But really focusing in on that. And I think it's important because we can't manage people like we manage tasks or processes or procedures, right? That, like I said earlier, people have a wide range of different things that motivate them, different things that keep them showing up every single day. And so really knowing when to focus on that relationship management and the people management, that's the systems. How are you doing? What skills and resources do you have, et cetera, is really important to balance. And being transparent with it. One of the things that I've heard in assessments before is that our leadership is always out in meetings with other people, other organizations, other agencies, and they're not here in the clinic. And so I think part of that's understanding, well, what are our leaders doing when they're in these meetings? People say I could use 2 more providers for the cost of this individual that's in a meeting all day, and that really will help our patients better. And so making sure that we communicate what are we doing when we're having these meetings and what that looks like at the different levels, I think is really valuable.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
I
I've
would
been.
just say ditto. Sorry, I'm just
Oh,
gonna
go
say
ahead,
ditto, and
Jason.
then no, I got nothing. I'm gonna say ditto and mute.
Well, we're getting down to the very end of time, but I've been looking through the chat and there's not really any questions per se that we haven't already addressed in the chat. But I will point out a couple of things that I'm finding, which are, for instance, when Howard is saying people want to be seen and heard and valued in the workplace, no matter how diverse the company is. As leaders, we need to promote a culture of belonging and provide a safe space. And it goes a long way towards improving morale, job satisfaction, and retention. So I really appreciate that perspective. And you can also see Cami talking about 5 languages of appreciation, which I have not read, so I think I need to. And then the final thing I will point out is that I feel like I read something. Oh, here it is from Zoe about an article, Stop Calling It Soft Skills and Call It Real Skills. And so true, because we can see the leaders that literally will drive our staff away. And when you can also see when a good leader comes in, how long it can take to recover from a very difficult or hard leader. So I know we have 2 minutes left before I need to turn it back over to Tia. Any last thoughts from my panel or any last questions from the audience today?
Kirsten, sorry, I didn't raise my hand, but I just want to say lots of good comments in the chat about how this was really great presentations today. And so I just want to say thank you to the panel and to you, Kirsten, as a moderator. These are the events from the education team that were really trying to get you some excellent content. So please make sure you, to Tia's point that she mentioned earlier, please fill out the survey because we really do read those and we go over them and we bring you content that you need and want this interaction. So I just want to say good job, you guys.
Any other thoughts from my group?
I just gonna put in the chat, but unlocking, in cases on video, unlocking hidden potential. You know, Adam Grant, Jason, and I were talking about that. He talks about how the reason that hard skills came up was because not how complex they are, but because it was back in the military days, and like NCOs were trying to assess different skills. Anything had to do with like tanks and steel and weapons, those are hard skills, and the leadership stuff on the battlefield and the people element were soft because they didn't involve steel. It's unfortunate because, as we all know, the soft skills are indeed the hardest skills.
Yeah, agreed. I appreciate even now there's a little bit more in the chat, and it's Joshua is saying that he hopes that ACHE will emulate this and add psychological safety trainings nationally, which is, I think we need so much more of that. So really good point. Well, let me turn it over in the last couple of minutes back to Tia, who is our host. Thank you all for joining us and letting us chat with you today about our thoughts on managing for morale and really culture of our workplaces. Tia.
On behalf of ACHE, I want to thank our chapter leaders that planned today's session, our moderator, and panelists, and all of you for your participation. Please complete the evaluation, which is open for 1 week. I've reshared it in the chat, so you have access to it. You can also access the evaluation by visiting your My ACHE page and selecting My Online Learning from the Helpful Links section on the right side of the screen. From there, click on the Access My Courses link, and you will be directed to our learning management system where you can complete the evaluation. In that same location, you will be able to access the recording of this session within approximately 2 business days. Everyone who attended today's event in its entirety will see their 1.5 hours of virtual interactive education credit posted to their My ACHE account within 2 weeks of this session in the My Education Credit section. That concludes our session, which is copyrighted in 2024 by the American College of Healthcare Executives. All rights reserved. Thank you, everyone, and have a phenomenal day.